Dreams in the Witch House. Released in 2023 and developed by Atom Brain Games, Dreams in the Witch House takes Lovecraft's 1930s short story and stretches it into a visual novel mixed with survival mechanics. At first glance, it looks like a life simulator. You step into the role of Walter Gilman, a young student renting a room in a rundown Arkham boarding house. Your daily routine seems simple: attend classes, manage money, eat and sleep. But even in that opening cycle, something feels wrong. The boarding house itself radiates unease. The walls are cracked, the furniture mismatched, and the attic above your room seems to creak far too often at night. As Walter studies mathematics and folklore, the game begins to blur reality with nightmare. Sleep offers no rest. He dreams of endless angles and corridors, geometries that shouldn't exist. Shapes fold into one another, suggesting that the room he's living in connects to something outside of human understanding. The gameplay reinforces the dread. Every choice you make has a cost. Study too much and your health declines. Skip meals and Walter grows weaker, more vulnerable to the strange fevers creeping in. Sleep too little and the visions intensify until reality itself starts bending. Before long, rats appear that don't behave like rats. Shadows stretch unnaturally across walls, and whispers suggest that Walter's presence in the house was never an accident. By the midpoint, the novel traps you in its own pattern. You're constantly chasing balance, trying to stay sane, keep grades up, and uncover the truth of the boarding house. Yet every path feels like it's feeding something larger. The attic isn't just storage space, it's a portal, or a cage, or both. And Walter's pursuit of knowledge makes him part of the ritual, whether you resist it or not. What makes Dreams in the Witch House effective is how it translates Lovecraft's cosmic horror into interactivity. The story isn't simply told to you, it makes you live inside the dread of repetition, scarcity, and inevitability. Just like Walter, you realize too late that the search for forbidden knowledge only leads in one direction, deeper into the waiting dark. The Innsmouth Case. Released in 2020 and developed by Robot Pumpkin Games, The Innsmouth Case is a text-driven visual novel that feels like a branching detective story on the surface, but underneath, it hides the DNA of Lovecraft's most infamous seaside town. At the start, you take the role of a private investigator called in to solve a missing persons case. A mother pleads with you to find her daughter, Tabitha, who vanished in Innsmouth. It sounds like a straightforward job: travel to the town, follow the clues, bring the girl back. But the moment you arrive, something feels off. Innsmouth is not presented as a normal place. Its streets are narrow, its buildings leaning and damp. The people avoid your eyes, their faces strangely sunken, their gaits awkward and stilted. They offer no help, only suspicion, and sometimes hostility. The narrative splits quickly into dozens of choices. You can try the local inn, press townsfolk for answers, search the harbor, or wander into the twisted back alleys. Each decision opens new branches, but none of them feel safe. The humor of the game disarms you at first. Characters speak in absurd tones, situations feel bizarrely comedic, and your detective's inner commentary is often sarcastic. But underneath the jokes, the dread grows. The missing girl's trail doesn't just lead through shady characters, it drags you deeper into the cult that rules the town, worshipping the ocean and the things that dwell beneath it. The deeper you go, the clearer it becomes that your choices aren't about success or failure, they're about how quickly you'll be swallowed. And this is where the Innsmouth Case works as cosmic horror. Every path ends badly. The game has dozens of possible conclusions, but not one of them provides clarity or triumph. You might be sacrificed in a ritual, absorbed into the cult, vanish into the sea, or simply disappear without explanation. Even the rare survivor outcomes leave questions unanswered. What really happened to Tabitha? Was she ever meant to be found? Or was she bait, pulling you into the same current that has drowned so many before? The brilliance of the Innsmouth Case is that it cloaks Lovecraft's oppressive dread inside comedy. The player laughs at the strangeness, but laughter doesn't save you. It only softens you for the inevitable turn, when the story reminds you that in Innsmouth, every road leads back to the sea, and no detective can outthink what waits in the dark water. Saya no Uta. First published in 2003 by Nitro Plus, Saya no Uta, The Song of Saya, is infamous in visual novel history for how far it pushes the boundary of horror. Written by Gen Orubuchi, it opens not with monsters or rituals, but with the story of a man named Fuminori who survives a car accident. After emergency brain surgery, his perception of the world changes completely. What should look normal, people, food, everyday objects, now appear to him as grotesque rotting masses. Human faces twist into melted flesh, voices sound like distorted screeches, and the air itself feels wrong. Fuminori lives inside this warped vision every day, trapped between sanity and collapse. His friends try to support him, but to his eyes, they are nightmares in human skin. Just as he edges toward despair, he meets a young girl named Saya. She looks human to him, beautiful and untouched by the corruption that covers everything else. To the player, though, Saya is something else entirely. Not a girl, but an alien being whose presence warps reality itself. The story becomes a descent into obsession. Fuminori clings to Saya as the only anchor in his collapsing world, and together they form a relationship that veers between tender and horrific. She protects him, he worships her, and both become complicit in acts that spiral far beyond morality. Neighbors vanish, friends grow suspicious, and the line between love story and nightmare completely erodes. What makes Saya no Uta so disturbing isn't only the gore or shock value, it's the way the novel forces you to live inside Fuminori's perspective. You don't just read about madness, you see the world through it. The game traps you in a perception where truth itself is unreliable, where the one thing that looks pure and kind to the protagonist is in fact the most dangerous creature he could embrace. At its core, Saya no Uta explains the horror of perception. It asks a question no other visual novel dares to. If your reality shattered and you could only trust one person, what would you sacrifice to keep them? The answer, as the story shows, is everything. Slay the Princess. Released in 2023 by Black Tabby Games, Slay the Princess disguises itself as a simple fairy tale quest, only to unravel into one of the most complex pieces of psychological and cosmic horror in the visual novel genre. At the start, the premise is almost laughably straightforward. You, the player, are told by a calm narrator that a princess is locked in the basement of a cabin in the woods. Your job is to slay her. That's it. But the moment you descend the stairs and meet the so-called princess, the story fractures. She doesn't act like a monster. She pleads, argues, and sometimes sits calmly as if she already knows your next move. The game splinters into loops, each run resetting with slight changes depending on what you chose before. Sometimes the princess is fragile and scared. Sometimes she's manipulative, and sometimes she's openly monstrous, but in every loop, her presence grows more overwhelming, as though she's not one person, but an endless series of variations collapsing into one another. The narrator, too, is part of the trap. His calm instructions to slay the princess become more insistent, more desperate as you resist or hesitate. At times he feels trustworthy, at others he feels complicit in the deception. The game's structure makes it impossible to know who's telling the truth. Is the princess a world-ending threat, or is the act of slaying her the very trigger that destroys everything? What makes Slay the Princess cosmic horror isn't gore or spectacle, it's inevitability. No matter how many loops you endure, no matter how you approach the princess, the outcome always carries you closer to the realization that the story cannot be escaped. The branching paths give you the illusion of choice, but the more you play, the clearer it becomes that every path folds back into the same collapse. In the end, the princess isn't just a character, she's the embodiment of inevitability itself. She shifts into whatever form the player needs to see, absorbing all resistance, all hesitation, until the act of trying to define her only strengthens her. And when the credits roll, you're left with the same crushing weight that defines all cosmic horror, the sense that you were never in control, and that what you feared most was not the monster in the basement, but the futility of fighting fate. The Shrouded Isle. Back in 2017, developer Kitfox Games created The Shrouded Isle, a cult management visual novel where the horror isn't hidden in shadows, it's written into every choice you make. On the surface, the game plays like strategy. You're the high priest of a village awaiting the awakening of an ancient god. Each season, you must guide the community, manage 5 influential families, and keep the cult obedient through rituals and sacrifice. The mechanics seem simple. Assign tasks, ensure faith remains strong, and root out disobedience. But beneath the numbers and text, the dread takes hold. The families you oversee are not just resources, they are people with secrets. Some are heretics, some are liars, some are dangerous in ways you won't uncover until it's too late. You need their support, yet you must also offer them up when the god demands blood. Every decision corrupts something: loyalty, purity, or stability. What makes the novel horrifying isn't just one jump scare or a single monster reveal, it's the slow erosion of morality. With each sacrifice, the community grows more fearful, but the cult grows stronger. You find yourself justifying cruelty, excusing brutality, because the god must be appeased. By the time the final ritual arrives, you realize you've become complicit in building the very nightmare you were meant to resist. The Shrouded Isle works as cosmic horror because it strips away the illusion of choice. You think you're managing, balancing, keeping the cult stable, but every path leads to corruption. The god doesn't care which family survives or which follower dies. It only wants obedience. And in the end, you don't beat the game, you reveal yourself as one more believer, willingly feeding the abyss. World of Horror. In 2023, Penstas finally brought World of Horror out of early access, and the result is one of the most unique blends of cosmic dread and retro visuals ever made. At first glance, it looks like a lost MS-DOS game, a black and white 1-bit interface, blocky portraits, and harsh pixel lines. But behind that lo-fi aesthetic is a roguelike visual novel that feels like both a love letter to Junji Ito and a direct descendant of Lovecraft's slow burn terror. The premise is deceptively simple. You're trapped in a small Japanese town as the world tips toward apocalypse. The old gods are awakening, reality itself is cracking, and the only way forward is to investigate mystery after mystery across different districts. Each run forces you to choose paths. Chase down a rumor, explore an abandoned building, visit a shrine, or face whatever lies in the hospital, the school, or the forest. What makes World of Horror so powerful is how it builds dread not from a single story, but from accumulation. Every choice adds stress, every encounter chips away at your stamina or your reason. A classroom rumor about a faceless man leads to a missing teacher. A strange rash on your arm might spread until it consumes you. The town itself feels cursed, filled with neighbors who look almost normal, but not quite. And when the gods finally break through, it's not a surprise. It's the confirmation of something you felt coming all along. Mechanically, the game locks you into cycles of risk and punishment. Resting at home heals you, but burns precious time. Investigation increases doom, the measure of how quickly the apocalypse arrives. And combat feels less like victory and more like desperation, every hit reducing sanity as much as it reduces the enemy. At its core, World of Horror explains cosmic dread in a way few visual novels attempt. There's no true ending where everything is saved. The gods cannot be defeated, only delayed, and every run ends with the same lesson. Survival is temporary, knowledge is costly, and the end always arrives, no matter how many times you try again. Dagon by H.P. Lovecraft. Released in 2021 by BitGolem, Dagon is a short kinetic visual novel that directly adapts Lovecraft's 1919 story of the same name. Unlike most visual novels, this one strips away choice almost entirely. Instead, it immerses you in a single narrative, the confession of a World War I veteran whose life unravels after a shipwreck leaves him stranded in a nightmarish oceanic landscape. The experience begins with something familiar, a man alone in his study, recounting his memories. His voice is weary, scattered, soaked in the sense that he has seen something beyond comprehension. Through his words, the story shifts back to the sea, where he escapes a German vessel and finds himself drifting in open water. Days pass and the waves carry him to a place that should not exist, a slimy, half-submerged wasteland reeking of rot. The pacing is slow, almost suffocating. Each description of the terrain, each step across the blackened ground, builds the sense that the sailor has entered a realm outside of human dominion. Eventually, he reaches a monolith covered in carvings, depictions of creatures that look both fish-like and human, locked in rituals that suggest an ancient order hidden beneath the sea. And then, in one unforgettable moment, he sees it, a titan rising from the deep, its form towering and alien, its presence crushing any illusion of human significance. The visual novel ends not with answers, but with collapse. The sailor's sanity fractures, his narrative spirals into despair, and when the perspective returns to his study, the implication is clear. He has not been confessing to an audience, but to himself, moments before ending his life. What makes Dagon effective is its faithfulness. By preserving Lovecraft's original text and layering it with atmospheric visuals and narration, it doesn't modernize or soften the tale. Instead, it emphasizes the inevitability of cosmic horror, the idea that some truths cannot be witnessed without destroying the witness. The story never needed a twist, or a monster fight. It only needed one man staring too long into the abyss and being swallowed whole. Sucker for Love, First Date. Launched in 2022 by Akabaka and published by Dread XP, Sucker for Love First Date flips the expectations of both dating sims and Lovecraftian horror on their heads. At first glance, it looks like a parody. Brightly colored visuals, bubbly character portraits, and a protagonist who wants nothing more than to romance eldritch deities. But beneath the comedy and absurd charm, the game uses its structure to explore obsession, ritual, and the danger of treating cosmic forces like playthings. The setup is deceptively simple. You, the unnamed main character, come into possession of a forbidden grimoire. Instead of fearing it, you eagerly use it to summon your first date. Not a human, but Luneta, a goddess who resembles a tentacled Lovecraft-inspired being. What follows are branching scenes where the player attempts to balance affection with ritual. drawing sigils, chanting verses, and following strict instructions just to keep the date going. The humor lands quickly. Lynetta acts like a flirty love interest, speaking in affectionate tones while demanding offerings and terrifying rituals. As the game continues, other routes open up, introducing different love interests, each one a parody of a different cosmic archetype. They are drawn like dating sim heroines, but each carries with them the weight of something unfathomable. What makes Sucker for Love more than a joke is how it leans into its duality. The mechanics aren't just funny, they're unnerving. Mess up a chant or misdraw a sigil and the scene doesn't end in laughter, it ends in death, madness, or worse. The player is forced to confront the fact that every interaction with these beings, no matter how sweetly it's framed, is still a dangerous brush with forces beyond human comprehension. The deeper meaning becomes clear. Obsession, even when wrapped in romance and horror, has consequences. The protagonist doesn't fear the rituals because they look like dates, but the rituals themselves remain real, binding, and deadly. The game leaves you with the realization that no matter how much you soften an eldritch being with pastel art and playful dialogue, their nature doesn't change. They will always be vast, unknowable, and indifferent. And that's why Sucker for Love First Date works as cosmic horror. It lures you in with affection, laughter, and parody, then tightens the noose by reminding you that even love stories can become cults, and that even in dating, some gods cannot be tamed. And that wraps up part 1 of every cosmic horror visual novel explained. If you're looking for something that captures Lovecraft's spirit most faithfully, Dagon is a perfect starting point, short, sharp, and devastating in its inevitability. But if you want a blend of comedy and terror, Sucker for Love First Date shows how cosmic horror can wear a playful mask while still carrying teeth. Well, if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, share your favorite cosmic horror visual novel in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. We've got even stranger, darker titles lined up next, stories that bend reality in ways you won't see coming. Mycorrhiza. Released in 2022, Mycorrhiza is a free horror visual novel created by Fulminus Ictus, known for weaving discomfort into visual storytelling. It doesn't tell one neat tale. Instead, it threads 3 interconnected stories, each dipping into body horror, surreal landscapes, and characters who are forced to confront changes they can't reverse. The art style is sharp, almost clinical in its black and white contrast, which makes every warped detail stand out. One story follows a character trapped in a shifting city where the streets loop into themselves and familiar faces appear wrong, stretched, or incomplete. Another involves a workplace routine that begins to fracture as something inhuman hides beneath the rhythm of daily tasks. And threaded through all of them are fungal motifs, spores, growths, and networks that connect the characters' experiences in ways they can't fully see. The pacing is deliberate. Instead of throwing you into monsters or violence, the stories start normal, almost bland. But as each scene continues, the reality bends. Rooms feel smaller, bodies feel unstable, and thoughts become unreliable. By the end, the reader is left not with answers, but with an aftertaste, as if the stories themselves were infections, spreading slowly across your memory. That's the heart of Mycorrhiza. Its horror doesn't come from a single creature or jump scare. It comes from the way it mimics fungal growth, quiet, persistent, and inevitable. You don't notice the change until it has already taken root, and when you put it down, you realize the unease isn't gone. It's still spreading in the back of your mind. Omen Exitio, Plague. Back in 2018, Tiny Bull Studios released Omen Exitio, Plague, a Lovecraftian gamebook-style visual novel that feels like stepping into a pulp adventure from the early 1900s. You play as Dr. Jake Huntington, a military doctor haunted by loss and regret, who finds himself swept into a global conspiracy that begins with whispers of a spreading plague. The format mirrors a choose-your-own-adventure novel. Pages of text appear with branching choices, each leading you deeper into political intrigue, occult discoveries, and the slow realization that the disease you're chasing is not natural. The infected seems to carry intelligence, bending human will, spreading cult-like devotion in the shadows. What begins as a medical mystery quickly swells into something more cosmic, with every answer leading to a deeper question. The writing does most of the heavy lifting. Instead of cinematic graphics or elaborate animation, Omen Exitio builds its dread through text descriptions and stark illustrations. A dark alley isn't just drawn, it's described in a way that lets your mind fill in the rot, the stench, the lurking figures who vanish when you look too closely. The branching paths let you choose whether to be cautious, reckless, or skeptical, but every choice pushes you closer to forces you cannot control. And what makes this novel resonate as cosmic horror is its inevitability. The plague itself feels like a metaphor for Lovecraft's unknowable truths. Unstoppable, uncaring, spreading across borders no matter how desperately you try to contain it. You don't conquer it, you don't cure it. At best, you uncover how powerless you were from the start, and that's where the horror lingers. and the knowledge that the story you've just read isn't about saving the world, it's about realizing the world was never yours to save. The Whisperer in Darkness. In 2016, an interactive adaptation of Lovecraft's The Whisperer in Darkness was released, bringing one of his more unsettling stories into visual novel form. You step into the role of Professor Wilmarth, a folklorist who begins corresponding with a man named Henry Akeley in rural Vermont. Akeley claims strange creatures lurk near his home, moving through the forests at night, leaving tracks that no human could have made. The story builds almost entirely through letters and conversations, just as Lovecraft originally wrote it. At first, Wilmarth is skeptical, brushing off the claims as superstition, but the more he reads, the harder it becomes to dismiss. Akeley describes buzzing voices, unnatural lights, and the sense of being watched by something that isn't bound by human limits. Eventually, Wilmarth travels to Akeley's remote farmhouse, and the descent begins. There are no branching paths, no alternate endings. Instead, the novel forces you through the same inevitability that defines Lovecraft's original. Wilmarth finds himself alone in the house, listening to Akeley speak from the shadows, his words strangely distorted. The truth, when it comes, is not a spectacle, but a realization. The voice he trusted is no longer human. The adaptation works by leaning into atmosphere over choice. The slow pacing and restrained design emphasize the core of the tale, that doubt can only hold out for so long before evidence corrodes it. By the end, Wilmarth isn't a hero or a survivor. He's a witness, trapped by knowledge that he can never forget. And the reader is left with the same weight, knowing that the voices in the Vermont hills may still be out there, waiting to be heard again. Hermitage, Strange Case Files. Released in 2021, Hermitage, Strange Case Files places you inside a quiet bookstore that hides far more than its shelves suggest. You play as the mysterious owner, a recluse with a shadowy past who spends his days observing customers and reading the strange stories that seem to walk through his door. At first, the cases look like simple tales of troubled people seeking advice, but as you listen, investigate, and dig deeper, each thread leads toward the supernatural. The novel plays out in episodes, each centering on a new mystery. A student worried about nightmares, a professor chasing knowledge he should never have touched, a group of friends stumbling into rituals they don't understand. Conversations branch and overlap, and the bookstore becomes the anchor for all of the stories. As the owner, you're not a hero charging into battle. You're an observer, a guide, piecing together truths from fragments while the darkness outside presses closer. The art direction reinforces the tone. Heavy shadows stretch across the screen, muted colors make every scene feel suffocated, and characters are drawn with subtle unease, as if something behind their eyes doesn't belong. The dialogue is sharp, laced with doubt and paranoia, constantly reminding you that nothing in Hermitage stays simple for long. The strength of Hermitage lies in its framing. Instead of pulling you into one cosmic event, it slowly convinces you that all these cases are connected. Every dream, every ritual, every unexplained disappearance points back to forces that are bigger than the characters themselves. And as the threads tighten, you begin to realize that even the bookstore, this supposed safe space, is part of the same web. By the end, the novel leaves you with the impression that the occult is always just outside the window, waiting to walk through the door, and that the person keeping the records is as trapped by it as anyone else. Frail Hearts, Veriscore Dom Leon. In 2022, Seges released Frail Hearts, Veriscore Dom Leon, a hybrid visual novel and JRPG that drops you into the grim city of Greece, a place where reality is thin and personal tragedies bleed into something far darker. Instead of following one protagonist, the story splits between four very different lives: a gangster, a nun, a scholar, and a young woman obsessed with books. Each of them is flawed, each of them broken in their own way, and each of them drawn step by step into encounters with things that should not exist. The city itself becomes a character. Greece is cold, oppressive, and constantly changing. Streets lead into blind corners, conversations twist into confessions, and violence hangs in the air like fog. Within this setting, the four stories unfold, sometimes brushing against one another, sometimes running parallel, but always leading toward revelations that suggest the same hidden truth. The world they inhabit is being corroded by something ancient, and the corruption is finding its way inside them. The visual style is stark and painterly, often leaning into surreal imagery when characters confront abominations. Fights with monsters are not just obstacles, they're extensions of the characters' inner struggles. Each encounter feels like a reflection: the gangster facing the consequences of his brutality, the nun clashing with faith that no longer protects her, the scholar torn between reason and obsession, and the bookworm dragged into stories that reshape her understanding of reality. You see, the power of Frail Hearts is in how it ties personal pain to cosmic intrusion. These characters aren't random victims, they're people already frayed at the edges, which makes them easier prey for forces beyond human scale. By the time their paths converge, you realize the real battle was never about defeating monsters in the streets of Greece. It was about resisting the inevitability of collapse. And in true Lovecraftian fashion, that resistance is fragile at best, because once you glimpse the truth, there's no going back. Cthulhu Mythos ADV, Lunatic Whispers. October 2022 saw the release of Cthulhu Mythos ADV, Lunatic Whispers by Gotcha Gotcha Games, a visual novel that blends classic Japanese adventure storytelling with TRPG-style mechanics. Instead of simply reading through dialogue and scenes, you're pulled into dice rolls, skill checks, and branching investigations, as if the story itself were a tabletop session slowly unraveling into madness. The setting is an abandoned hospital, a place of sterile halls and rotting decay, where every room feels like it has held secrets too long. You move through it step by step, encountering other survivors, strange documents, and inexplicable phenomena that all point towards something lurking beyond comprehension. The mechanics add tension. Every time you roll the dice to attempt a check, you know failure could mean losing reason, drawing attention to yourself, or stumbling into something that was better left undiscovered. The story's progression is deliberately fragmented. Information is scattered across journals, overheard conversations, and symbols that appear on the walls. Characters, like the player, are unreliable narrators, never fully sure if what they've seen was real or the product of fraying sanity. The atmosphere is less about sudden shocks and more about the slow certainty that nothing in the hospital is coincidence. Every locked door, every shadow in the corridor is part of a larger design. Lunatic Whispers stands out because of this balance between narrative and mechanics. Instead of simply telling you that madness spreads, it lets you feel it in the uncertainty of the dice. Each roll carries the weight of the inevitability, each failed check another reminder that knowledge is dangerous. By the end, the hospital doesn't feel like a setting you explored, it feels like a labyrinth that used you to tell its story. Tsui no Sora. Originally released in 1999 by Karo Q, Tsui no Sora is one of the earliest works written by SCAG, later known for the cult classic Subarashiki Hibi. It's a Denpa-style visual novel, a subgenre that thrives on disorientation, paranoia, and psychological collapse. Rather than focusing on monsters or rituals, the horror unfolds through characters who slowly lose their grip on reality, dragging the reader down with them. The story follows Yukito Minakami, a high school student whose life begins to spiral after a classmate's suicide. At first, his world feels ordinary: school corridors, classroom chatter, friendships caught in routine. But the tone shifts quickly. Conversations start to fracture. His classmates' behavior grows erratic, and ideas of conspiracies and cult-like thinking spread among them. What should be the safe backdrop of adolescence turns into a stage for unraveling minds. The visual novel does not hand the player neat answers. Instead, it overwhelms with dense dialogue, sudden tonal shifts, and surreal imagery. Characters speak in circles, obsess over contradictions, or spout cryptic philosophies that leave you unsure what's real. The more Yukito tries to make sense of events, the less stability the narrative offers. It becomes clear that the collapse is not just happening to him, it's happening to the entire world he inhabits. What makes Tsui no Sora so enduring in the Denpa tradition is how it uses atmosphere instead of spectacle. Horror here is not a monster in the dark, it's the sense that reality itself is untrustworthy. The classroom may look the same, but the rules governing it no longer hold. By the time the story closes, you're left with the unsettling sense that normal life can unravel at any moment, and that the line between sanity and madness is far thinner than you ever imagined. Sucker for Love, Date to Die For. Released in April 2024, Sucker for Love, Date to Die For is the sequel to First Date, once again developed by Akabaka and published by Dread XP. Where the original game leaned into parody and comedy while flirting with cosmic horror, this follow-up takes the formula further, layering in a stronger narrative while keeping its mix of romance, ritual, and absurdity intact. This time you play as Stardust, a new protagonist investigating mysterious disappearances in their hometown. The search begins like a standard visual novel mystery, but quickly collides with cultists, dark rituals, and the introduction of a new eldritch love interest, Roxanne, a goat-like deity whose presence is both charming and terrifying. The game branches into multiple routes, each one balancing moments of lighthearted dating sim parody with the heavy atmosphere of a world slowly unraveling under supernatural influence. Visually, the style is bold and exaggerated, resembling a 90s anime aesthetic with bright colors and expressive character art. But beneath the playful tone, the horror always bubbles up. Choices carry real consequences, and missteps in ritual or dialogue often end with brutal outcomes. Every encounter with Roxanne reminds the player that affection for a cosmic being isn't harmless fun, it's an invitation to lose yourself in something far greater and more dangerous. Date to Die For succeeds because it expands the scope of the original idea without softening the edges. The humor keeps the player engaged, but the underlying horror, cults, obsession, and the futility of trying to balance human life with divine affection keeps the experience grounded in cosmic dread. By the time the endings play out, you're left with a story that feels both ridiculous and deeply unsettling. Proof that even parody can't strip away the weight of the unknown. And that brings us to the end of part 2. If you want something short and unsettling, The Whisperer of Darkness captures Lovecraft's voice with eerie faithfulness, but if you prefer cosmic dread wrapped in absurd romance, Sucker for Love proves that even parody can leave you uneasy when the lights go out. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like the video, share your favorite cosmic horror visual novel in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next one.